From London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. US President Donald Trump is due to deliver his first major speech to international leaders since retaking office. We'll be in Davos.
Our other headlines, Africa says it's open for business. We'll be hearing from some of the continent's leaders at the World Economic Forum.
Elon Musk puts a dampener on Trump's $500 billion artificial intelligence project, saying tech bosses don't have the cash.
And the rising sun eclipses coal. Europe basks in the glow of a sustained move away from fossil fuels towards solar power.
United States President Donald Trump is about to speak to delegates at the World Economic Forum in the Swiss town of Davos.
The speech delivered via video link is his first major address to business and political leaders since he returned to office. During the last 3 days, he signed a string of executive orders rolling back on climate policies and threatening tariffs on several countries and the European Union.
Well, our correspondent Juliet Mann is in Davos. So, Juliet, President Trump due to speak any moment now.
This is the main event, and the Congress Hall is full. You know, I haven't seen so many people, the throngs that were queuing up to get into the Congress Centre. It's astonishing when you consider that he's not appearing in person. You know, he's no stranger to Davos. He's been here twice before during his first term, but this time he's going to be appearing via video link, as you say, giving a speech, and then there will be a question and answer session. You know, since he took office earlier this week, as you mentioned, he has issued a string or a barrage of executive orders. He's rescinded a number of green initiatives. He's paused the ban in TikTok, and he's launched an initiative to collect all of those tariffs. Now, those global widespread tariffs he said that he would put into effect on day one didn't materialize then, but don't forget, in his inaugural speech, he said that there will be duties of 25% on goods from Mexico and from Canada that will kick in from the 1st of February. And he's also vowed to take back Greenland and annex and also the Panama Canal. So everyone here listening in very intently to see if he's going to give more clues, more detail on those tariffs. Will they be on China? Will they be on the European Union? Will they be on Russia? And also maybe to hear if he has anything to say on some of those geopolitical and geoeconomic issues, such as in Ukraine and in Gaza. Let's bring in someone now and let's dig deeper into what we can expect. Hello there, Arantxa González-Laya, former EU Minister of Foreign Affairs and now Dean of the Paris School of International Affairs. You met Donald Trump first time round. What was he like?
Well, what you see is what you get. Pretty direct, wants to take you by surprise, and ultimately likes to win after a long and protracted negotiation, but he wants to win.
So on those tariffs, you know, I'm just thinking about the OECD's Director General, who here said it's in nobody's interest to have a trade war. What does Donald Trump as president's second time round mean for global trade?
Well, he's got basically roads. Road number one, he just has tariffs on international trade on all his international partners. It's going to be pretty messy. It's going to be pretty messy for the partners, but it's going to be pretty messy for the U.S. too, because more tariffs equals more inflation, higher prices for U.S. consumers. And this is what he's been promising, exactly the opposite of what he's been promising U.S. consumers, lowering prices. But there is another avenue, is that he sits down with partners and they try to strike a deal. Let's take the European Union. He exports to the EU quite a lot of services. The EU exports quite a lot of manufacturers to the US. It's pretty kif-kif. Can they do a little bit better? Maybe they can find a way to negotiate. Hitting each other on the head with tariffs will be a lose-lose game. And what we are looking for is a win-win outcome.
Someone who talks a lot about win-win is President Xi of China. What do you think Donald Trump's presidency is going to mean for the relationship between the US and China?
Well, it remains to be seen. We don't know. You know, again, there is two roads. Road number one is he tries to find a space where he negotiates with China. We all know that the relationship is antagonistic. that they have difficulties in the relationship, both sides. The U.S. has difficulty with China and China with the U.S. We all know that. But there is a way to negotiate the differences, try to see if there is a space where they can agree to positive outcomes for both, or they take the opposite route, which is hitting each other on the head. Again, given the importance that the two have for international trade, for the stability of the international financial system, the route of trying to find a way to agree to disagree would be probably preferable.
I wonder then what the best case and the worst scenario is going to be then for the European Union. You've got titans of industry like the boss of Siemens saying that companies like theirs are tariff-proof.
Well, look, the EU-US trade relationship is the most consequential in the world. This is the big artery of international trade in the world. When you choke that artery, you are shooting yourself in the foot. So I think it's important to make sure that if there is a disagreement, sit down and negotiate. If not, it's going to be ugly, because it's going to be an eye for an eye, and both will be blind.
Just quickly, Arantxa, what about geopolitics, geoeconomics? Do we expect Trump to say anything on Ukraine, on Gaza?
I think he's been prudent on Ukraine, and I think it's for a good reason, because whatever he says on Ukraine will be read not only by American allies around the world, but it will be read also by adversaries of the U.S. around the world. It would be read by China. It would be read by Russia. It would be read by Iran, by North Korea. So I think he's been treading carefully, and I think it's the right thing to do. As to Gaza, I hope that everyone works to make sure this peace agreement holds, is the best outcome we can hope for a region that has suffered enormously in these last months.
Arantxa Gonzalez, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much. President Trump has started speaking here at the World Economic Forum in Davos. I think we can show you some of those live pictures now. I'll be back a little bit later on in the programme once we've been able to dig in and see what he has to say and give you a little bit of analysis on that. I'll also be talking about China's global trade footprint and what they're doing, where they're looking to grow the economy worldwide. Back to you a bit later.
Juliet, we'll catch up with you a little bit later on in the programme, but for now, Juliet Mann in Davos.
China says it'll work with the United States to promote the stable development of economic ties. The comments were made by China's Commerce Ministry in response to questions about Donald Trump's threat of tariffs.
China's position on the tariff issue is consistent. Tariff measures are not conducive to China and the United States, nor to the entire world. China is willing to work with the United States to promote the development of China-US economic and trade relations in a stable, healthy, and sustainable direction in accordance with the principles of mutual trust, peaceful coexistence, and win-win cooperation.
China's financial regulators have unveiled measures to urge large state-owned insurers to buy more shares as Beijing seeks to support its stock market. Insurance companies are being guided to raise the proportion of their investment in shares listed on the Chinese mainland. A pilot program later this year is expected to channel at least $13 billion from insurers to long-term stock investment.
Economic growth in South Korea has fallen to an 18-month low. A 1.2% expansion in the 3 months to December fell short of expectations. Analysts say weak consumption and a downbeat construction sector offset a rise in exports.
Consumer confidence in the UK has slumped to a new low. The British Retail Consortium showed expectations for the economy over the next 3 months plunged in January to -34, marked decline from -27 in December. The BRC says the mood is particularly bleak among older shoppers who fear tough times ahead.
The British supermarket chain Sainsbury's says it'll cut 3,000 jobs due to what it calls a challenging cost environment. Most of those job losses will come from the closure of cafes and pizza and patisserie counters, which the supermarket says are not regularly used by the majority of customers.
A spokesperson for British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has refused to rule out the UK joining a pan-European customs deal. Earlier, the idea appeared to be dismissed by the Housing Minister, Matthew Pennycook. It comes after the European Union's Brexit trade negotiator told the BBC that Brussels would consider the plan.
The UK's competition watchdog is to investigate the impact of Apple and Google's mobile platforms on customers, consumers and businesses, including app developers. Investigators will look at whether products and services operating outside the tech giant's remit face unfair practices and if new guidelines are needed. Apple and Google both said they're committed to fostering a competitive marketplace.
Elon Musk has claimed the tech titans involved in Donald Trump's $500 billion artificial intelligence project, Stargate, don't have the funding for it. The US president says it will be the biggest AI infrastructure in history. But Musk has poured cold water on it, leading to some investors hitting back.
Let's talk to our correspondent John Terrett in New York. John, Elon Musk dissing Mr. Trump's AI plans.
Well, that is putting it mildly. Another way of putting it is to say he got some great big clodhoppers on and he stamped all over it. Then he walked away, came back and had another go, just like that. I mean, it's really that bad. It really is. You see, you have to understand something. This was Trump's big announcement, the first really big one. I know that we've had a lot of activity since Monday, and I know there's been a lot of signing of executive orders, and those are changing the direction that this country is going in and affecting millions of people. But the big one that he really cared about in terms of glamour and glitz was this announcement about AI. And the project, as you rightly say, is called Stargate. That's the name going forward. And on the table right now, $100 billion, and it's going to rise to $500 billion over time. And the company, it's a private investment deal to promote AI and to make AI the center of America's world and America the center of the AI world. And the private companies are Oracle, run by Larry Ellison, which is a software company in California and Texas these days, and Arizona. And it's the company that keeps the TikTok data in America on their servers in Arizona. Then there's ChatGPT, the OpenAI people led by Sam Altman, who said he thought it was just terrific that we were able to pull this money together and go in this direction in the United States. And SoftBank, the Japanese tech investor, which you know in Europe for lots of reasons, but the reason I think you know them more than ever is that they are owners in the company called Arm Holdings, which is based in Cambridge to the north of London. And Arm Holdings trades here in New York, and they are, very high-end chip designers, and they send those chips out to be made elsewhere. But anyway, the money is to be used for data centers, which is how these companies kind of make money on AI. Big, powerful electronic centers which you don't know too much about, but also public campuses where OpenAI can be discussed and where people can work and think about it in the future, all of this kind of stuff. So enter the first amigo, the first bro, Elon Musk, and he stamps all over this big idea because he says, well, it's all very well, but these companies don't have the money. They simply don't have the money. And he may or may not be right. I don't know, because I must admit $500 billion is a lot of money. But here's the thing. You have to remember a couple of things. Number one, Elon Musk founded, along with Sam Altman, OpenAI back in 2015, and they fell out over the direction the company was going in. Number two, Elon Musk has his own AI company. It's called xAI. They have raised squillions already, and they're going to raise squillions more. So it's possible he felt a bit left out in this deal, really. And then the third reason, I think, is really just that, the whole thing is so very much futuristic, and we've yet to see really, which direction it's actually going in. But the other thing to remember is that I have personally lost track of the number of times you get a headline saying we're investing 100 billion or we're investing 500 billion, and then you look at the detail and it turns out actually that they're doing nothing of the sort. It's 10 billion to be used as a pump primer, hoping they get to 100 billion because other companies will come in, and if they don't, then the government will stump up more money, but very often it's over 10 years or 20 years. So those figures are a bit misleading, I suspect. Elon Musk might very well be on to something. Anyway, there's a big tech sell-off going on here right now. The Nasdaq's down sharply, and all the chip makers are down, with the exception of Oracle and SoftBank. Not that Oracle's a chip maker, but you understand. The two involved in this, their shares are up, and all the other techs are down at the moment.
John, another story with interest both sides of the pond. A new US ambassador to the EU, given what perhaps might lie ahead.
Well, this is keeping with the theme of a businessman returning to the White House and a business-centric Congress. It's a new EU ambassador announced within the past 24 hours, and he is the former CEO of a big restaurant chain here, which is called CKE. Now, when I say a big restaurant chain, in a way it isn't. It's actually number 22 on the list. There are 21 other restaurant trades in this company, ahead of this company, CKE, and the restaurants they own you probably haven't heard of outside the country, but I'll just list them for fun. Carl's Jr., does that mean anything to anybody? No, don't think so. Hardee's, double E at the end, and then Green Burrito and Red Burrito. I've got to be honest with you, I haven't heard of them either, and it just is testament to how big this country is, because you can have a corporation like this with all these businesses, and actually other people working in New York, for example, have never heard of them. Anyway, this man, whose name is Andrew Pudster, P-U-Z-D-E-R, was nominated for Labour Secretary back in 2017, but he didn't make it for one reason or another. And now President Trump is saying Europe is being very, very bad to the United States, hinting of tariffs coming as soon as next week. I should remind you that Christine Lagarde, head of the European Central Bank, has said in the past 24 hours that Trump wants Europe to buy more American goods. But one of the things that would aid that and appease him is if there was a stronger euro, because that would create demand within the European Union for American goods. And that is true. Trump needs a weaker dollar for his plans to succeed, but he also needs stronger currencies dotted around the world. Finally, you're getting in America, in the UK, you're getting the banker Warren Stephen as the UK ambassador, or the US ambassador to the UK. He's been nominated, yet to be appointed. And Mark Burnett, who's the producer of The Apprentice, that famous television program that made Trump so popular, certainly in America. He's coming as the special envoy to London. So that's what's happening elsewhere in Europe. And of course, President Trump is addressing Davos right now. And I heard Juliet say, you know, that everyone there is rapt with attention. And I'm sure he will make news. It'll be interesting to see what he actually says.
John, thank you for that. Our correspondent, John Terrett in New York. And I should say that we'll take you back to Mr. Trump during the course of this programme.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. A new wildfire breaks out near Los Angeles, forcing tens of thousands of people to flee their homes.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
For China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us. And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
You might think you are better informed in an information age. The fact is, people are more often misled by misinformation. You might think every voice is heard in a digital world. The fact is, many nations and peoples are still underrepresented. And data poverty shuts out many. We at CGTN are committed to transcending the information gap and the digital divide. CGTN, bridging nations and civilizations. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. 2024 was a pivotal year for green energy in Europe. The European Electricity Review found for the first time solar power overtook coal as an energy source for generating electricity, accounting for 11%. Solar is growing in every EU country, and more than half now use either little or no coal. Clean energy accounted for nearly 3/4 of EU power generation, and use of renewables reached 47%, both record highs, powered by the continued growth of solar power and a recovery in hydropower. And emissions from the EU's power sector fell to half the 2007 peak, as use of fossil fuels fell to the lowest level in 40 years. Well, let's talk now to Dr. Chris Rosslow, who's a senior analyst at the energy think tank Ember, which carried out this review. Good to see you, Chris. Thanks for joining us. So we're seeing from your review there that solar power has overtaken coal for the first time. Are we now seeing the beginning of the end for fossil fuels and electricity generation?
Thank you. I think it is clear that fossil fuels are losing their grip on European energy. And indeed, I think coal power is near the end. Coal power is increasingly concentrated in just 2 European countries, in Germany and Poland. And as you were saying, it's now been pushed down into 6th place as an EU power source. It was as high as 3rd place as recently as 2019. The EU still uses more gas than coal for power, and the decline is slower in gas, but we have seen 5 consecutive years now of declining gas power, which does indicate that's becoming a structural decline as well.
So as well as some of these declines, we've seen growth in renewables. Has that meant that Europe's now in a place where it's more energy secure?
I think that can definitely, that's definitely the case, yes. Of course, if you look back over the last few years, there was a major event when Russia attacked Ukraine, and it left the EU scrambling to find alternative gas supplies. But because of the growth in wind and solar, it actually didn't need to find as much gas from elsewhere as it was importing from Russia. So we estimate that the growth in wind and solar, just in the 5 years since the start of the European Green Deal, has helped the EU avoid 59 billion euros worth of fossil fuel imports. So that it would have had to import roughly a 1/5 extra gas on top of what it did just for power generation if it wasn't for the growth of wind and solar over that period.
Well, let's talk about that Green Deal. Is that what's made the difference in growth of renewables?
It definitely set the direction of travel. It increased Europe's climate ambition, it increased Europe's very high-level targets, and then it was over to national governments to set the kind of wheels in motion on the ground, if you will, by introducing renewable policies, support policies. But really, I think going back again to the gas crisis a few years ago in 2022, when the cost of gas soared as a result of that, it really profoundly shifted the economics in favour of wind and solar power. And that remains the case today. They're very competitive. They're the cheapest forms of energy, much cheaper than gas generation today, because gas is still relatively expensive, even though it's come down a bit since those highs.
So lots of positives around renewables then, but do you think Europe's doing enough to transition to them when you look at other places like China, for example, which are going much further and much faster?
So I think Europe has a genuine case for being a clean power leader in its power sector. As you were mentioning at the top there, more than 70% now of Europe's electricity comes from clean sources. China is still much more dependent on coal on the one hand, but on the other hand, you're right that China is investing huge sums into clean energy, which are really changing the landscape in China. So there's a slight difference there in the comparison. Is Europe doing enough in other ways? I think when we look at solar power, the success there is very clear, and that is on track for, let's say, European energy targets. With the wind power sector, however, we are seeing growth. It's not accelerating at the rate it needs to, and that's really important because wind power and solar power are actually very complementary to each other. They generate energy at different times of day, different times of year, and also, as I was mentioning earlier, wind power is also significantly cheaper than gas power. So it will help to improve energy affordability in Europe if Europe can accelerate that growth in wind power too.
Chris, good to talk to you. Thank you for joining us. That's Dr. Chris Rosslow from Ember.
Well, the move from coal to solar is long overdue for some. Juliet Mann has been talking to Eric Law, Vice President LONGi, the world's largest manufacturer of solar modules.
That's very interesting. That's very much aligned with rapid deployment, the speed, right? We typically contribute to the decline cost and the technology innovation and also scale of the manufacturing. That's all other contributor factors. But the energy transition is starting after Paris Agreement. The trend never turning around, regardless, okay? So we are seeing it's clearly the solar energy is become, initially we call complementary energy source. Now it's become prevailing the energy source. It's become because the cost and because of deployment, because of affordability, because of accessibility, and also it's fit a lot of area, every corner globally, as long as you have sunlight. So it's clearly become the main trend. That's explaining why they overtake the coal.
So it's overtaken coal. Do you see that trend continuing? Because when you think about, Donald Trump saying drill, baby, drill, you might think, well, hang on, solar's got less of momentum behind it.
Yeah, I think that's part of the challenge the solar transition is facing, right? This geopolitical challenge, and also some extreme weather conditions is disrupt the energy system or grid system or transmission system. But keep in mind, right, the more those challenges we are facing, the more we need a resilient and stabilized, we call distributed energy system.
A new wildfire has broken out in the Los Angeles area, the latest in a series of devastating blazes that started more than a fortnight ago.
Over 30,000 people have been told to leave their homes in an area north of the city. Our correspondent Ray Addison reports.
A sodium orange sky burning brightly above Los Angeles. Eyewitness footage filmed from a smoke-covered highway as the city faces yet another deadly fire. Officials say this latest blaze, dubbed the Hughes Fire, started 80 kilometers north of LA and, fueled by strong winds and dry brush, rapidly consumed 38 square kilometers. So far, it has refused all attempts at containment, forcing mandatory evacuation orders for more than 31,000 people as firefighters battle through the night.
Our hopes tonight are that we are able to make further progress on the fire. Hopefully the winds will subside, our relative humidity will increase, giving us the upper hand on the fire.
It's the latest challenge for LA's firefighters, who have managed to bring two major wildfires in the metropolis largely under control after they ravaged Los Angeles. Since the Eaton and Palisades fires broke out on January 7th, they've burned an area nearly the size of Washington, D.C., killed 28 people and damaged or destroyed nearly 16,000 structures. Both are now mostly curbed, but much of Southern California remains under a red flag warning for extreme fire risk due to strong, dry winds. Meanwhile, the outbreak of the Hughes Fire will pile further pressure upon the county's already stretched resources, as officials once again warn of an immediate threat to life. Ray Addison, CGTN.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the young people in the UK struggling to find work as the government tries to do something to help.
Tradition, trade and culture have connected Europe and China for hundreds of years.
In the 18th century, a small number of products escaped from China and lit a touch paper in the West of excitement.
In this special series, we'll uncover the intertwined social and cultural histories of Europe and China, from the ancient Silk Road to the modern era.
Art is traveling as a silent ambassador to spread the word about culture and civilization.
It's amazingly impressive because they were such incredibly talented artists.
When you talk about silk, with a value of 3 or 4 garments, you could buy a palace.
We'll be seeking out the European spaces where traces of China lie hidden in plain sight.
Wow!
This is the Chinese room, and it's definitely one of my favorites within the house.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Elon Musk puts a dampener on Trump's $500 billion artificial intelligence project, saying tech bosses don't have the cash.
All other headlines, the rising sun eclipses coal. Europe basks in the glow of a sustained move away from fossil fuels towards solar power.
And US President Donald Trump has told delegates at the World Economic Forum in Davos that America is back and open for business.
And Juliet is there for us in Davos. What else has he had to say to political and business leaders?
Jamie and Robin, Trump said that this is the golden age for America, and that the US is a strong sovereign state, and what he wants to do is unlock regulation to unleash the economy. He's going to make the biggest tax cuts in American history and change the fortunes of ordinary Americans. But he did say that there is an energy emergency at home. So he wants to drill, he wants to access that liquid gold, which he says is underneath much of the United States. And staying with energy, energy security, he said that he wants to talk to Saudi Arabia and the OPEC members to bring down the price of oil. He said that that should have happened a long time ago, and if the price of oil reduces, that he feels would be the catalyst to end the war that we're seeing, the conflict that we're seeing in Ukraine. He talked a lot about AI and innovation, said that he wants to make the United States a world capital of artificial intelligence. On defence, he said that he's going to speak to all the NATO members because he wants them to increase their spending to 5% of GDP. He's often been quite critical of NATO members not reaching the agreed amounts that they were meant to spend. Most of the time it hovers around 2% for the big economies like the UK, like Germany. But he's saying he wants to have that conversation. Enough is enough. And in terms of business, well, he's talking here about energy, he's talking here about infrastructure. When it comes to the EU, he says there's more red tape in the EU than there is in China. He thinks that that bureaucracy should be looked into, and that actually it's crazy that there's it's very difficult to get farm products into Europe when Europe's sending across all of its electric vehicles. So there needs to be conversations and tariffs on various European goods. He also did say that he doesn't think the European Union should be going after big tech companies like Facebook, companies like Google. But his message for industry and for businesses when it comes to trade was really that America is open for business. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
My message to every business in the world is very simple. Come make your product in America, and we will give you among the lowest taxes of any nation on earth. We're bringing them down very substantially, even from the original Trump tax cuts. But if you don't make your product in America, which is your prerogative, then very simply you will have to pay a tariff.
Well, Trump and his flurry of executive orders and the potential for them shaking up global trade systems has really dominated a lot of the discussions here in Davos. But many other leaders have been keen to stress other avenues and the importance of the growing importance of the global south and other places where trade barriers could be coming down. Trade within geopolitical blocs. Let's take a look at where China is looking to trade.
China is expanding its global trade footprint into the global south, helped by a policy of zero tariffs for the world's least developed economies, which came into effect last month. Countries in Africa, Asia and South America have deepened their trade ties with China at a faster rate than with Europe and the US. China does more external trade than any other country, accounting for more than 14% of the global volumes in 2022. Compare that to almost 50 years ago, when it was less than 1%. Most of that business has been with the biggest, most developed economies, like the US and Europe, and that is still growing. But exports from China to the global south have surged, growing more than 111% between 2012 and 2022, compared with just 62% with the rest of the world. And not only are developing nations buying more Chinese goods, China's buying more from them too. Imports are up 47%.
At this year's World Economic Forum in Davos, there are more delegates from emerging markets than ever before. We caught up with the president of Botswana, Duma Botha, who said that Africa and all it has to offer should be given more recognition. He says that the future is looking really bright.
I'm not sure whether the world has been quick enough, but certainly the world is beginning to pay attention. And I think the reason the world is paying attention is that Africa has begun to take itself more seriously than it has before. We've now begun and are about to conclude, get everybody on board in relation to the Africa Free Continental Trade Area, which will open the barriers, remove all barricades to trade within Africa, amongst African countries, and increase the volume of trade amongst the African countries. And that is a population of about 1.4 billion. And so when we look, and that's a very young population, whose dynamism and youthful vitality will drive the economy. And by 2050, we will have a much larger population and we will be the youngest continent in the whole world. And so Africa has huge potential. But Africa can maximize on the benefits of this potentiality by ensuring that it has stability politically, it has institutions that are durable, that can sustain the countries outside of individuals, and that the economies grow, and the GDP of each country and collectively of the African continent is increased exponentially, as it should and can be. And in the process, the world will now have no option but to pay attention to Africa. Africa is it's not just the next frontier. It is the now frontier. It is the future.
I spoke to Nigeria's Trade Minister, Jumole Odewole, and she said to me that Nigeria is open for business and they're working hard to prove it.
The first thing we're looking at is actually getting Africans excited about investing in Africa. Or should I say businesses operating in Africa. There's been a lot of money made in Africa, but it tends to go out. So we're trying to retain investment. That's one of the first things that I'm working on. And then since Mr. President assumed office, over $50 billion has been announced as investments coming into Nigeria. Since 10 weeks ago when I was appointed, I'm tracking that. I'm reaching out to those companies. What will it take to make these investment announcements concrete and have all that capital come in?
What steps have you taken to make Nigeria more business-friendly?
Making sure that there's good reform, that the policies are fit for purpose. You know, the administration immediately worked on monetary reforms and on fiscal reforms. So this is where the trade for investment for exports in particular kicks in. So it's an inflection point for the Tinubu administration.
Do you think that voice, the voice Nigeria has, and other economies of the global south perhaps, that having a louder voice now in the global economy?
In the last 5 years, the world has changed quite a bit. And I think that as we listen more and as we actively review our relationships, we're looking out for body language, we're looking out for commitment, we're looking out for which partners, which friends are actually supporting us.
Which sectors in particular might you like to see the relationship growing stronger between China and Nigeria?
On our railways, our road initiatives, our airports, the Chinese government and businesses, Chinese businesses have been quite vibrant in this space, as have Nigerians as well. So we're looking forward to bridging that gap. We're also looking forward to the sectors that are important to us, our exports to China, making sure that that's more robust, making sure that there's more activity in the agriculture sector, because that is where we need a lot of jobs and lots of catalytical. In the digital space, technology, that is where in services we're competitive. So those are the areas that are important to us.
Nigeria's Trade Minister talking about Chinese investment in African infrastructure. Well, Chinese investment has also brought new trade routes to South America, most recently with the opening of the Cancre port in Peru. Wang Chiro reports on how that's opening up new trade routes.
The pulse of global trade beats faster with every passing moment here. Situated at the edge of the Pacific Ocean, this once sleepy fishing village is now at the heart of a transformation to connect continents. Inaugurated in November, the Chancay port now has 4 fully automated terminals up and running.
With this port, the opportunity to access an immense market, which is the Asian one, is open. This is the big boom for the Peruvian market, in the first place, but also for the Brazilian market.
China is Peru's largest trading partner, with copper, iron and agricultural products making up the bulk of Peruvian exports. And bilateral trade reached nearly $38 billion in 2023. The port doesn't just benefit Peru, but also its regional neighbors. With this new hub, vessels between Asia and South America no longer need a stopover at ports in North America. The direct route reduces the voyage time between the two continents from 35 days to just 23, meaning a 20% drop in shipping costs. The port is expected to handle 1 million containers annually, generating an annual $4.5 billion in revenue for Peru and creating 8,000 jobs. Many regional businesses see huge opportunities for expansion.
Many opportunities are going to come. It's going to be easier for us to bring our products here to Shanghai and then to Shanghai.
With US President Donald Trump back in the White House, many are fearful that any tariffs imposed in Washington could disrupt global trade. Trump has continued to threaten heavy duties on key US trading partners, including China, Canada, and Mexico. By offering a reliable and efficient gateway for trans-Pacific trade, the Shanghai port may benefit by its ability to offer an alternative route in a world bracing for escalating trade tensions. Wang Xiwei, CGTN.
You know, Jamie and Robin, the corridors of the Congress Centre here and the hotel meeting rooms up along the promenade in Davos are abuzz. This is the place where deals begin. The United Arab Emirates global logistics firm DP World has announced it wants to invest $1 billion in another port in Peru. And the announcement about that investment came after a meeting between Peru's president and the CEO of that company here in Davos. It's the place to be.
It certainly is, and you're there. Juliet, thank you for that. Our correspondent, Juliet Mann in Switzerland.
The UK government has unveiled its biggest reforms in decades in a bid to deal with unemployment and economic inactivity, pledging almost $300 million to tackle the causes.
This includes creating 8 regions where youth unemployment will be targeted. Our correspondent, Jen Copestake, has been to the East Midlands.
Finding a job in the UK has become increasingly difficult. With 1.8 unemployed people searching for every vacancy, competition is increasing. This includes Britain's young people who may be entering the job market for the first time.
Across the UK, just over 13% of young people aged between 16 and 24 are considered NEETs. That's not in education, employment or training. That's about 15% of young men and around 11% of young women. Around 395,000 young people are unemployed and just over 550,000 are considered economically inactive.
Laura Jane Rowlings is the CEO of Youth Employment UK, which conducts the country's largest census on young people's feelings about work and education.
It's not a good read. It's been a really tough few years for young people. The period that they've had through the pandemic, but then a cost of living crisis. We have this global uncertainty now. So actually some of the key findings that we've seen over the years are really starting to trouble us in terms of young people's self-confidence, their belief that they'll find a good job where they live.
Northampton is one city which will receive extra funding from the government to improve its employment centre, where we met Ruby.
It is difficult not having a job because obviously I'm 18, I've got to pay for my car, I've got to pay for rent, food shopping, necessities. It is really difficult.
Ruby says the centre has been very helpful, but she's also unsure of what career path to take or if she can afford it.
I'd have to get an apprenticeship, and that's going back to college for 3 years. College 3 days a week, working 2 days a week, but I'd only be on £6 an hour. I can't live off that. Like, it's not even something I can work around with all my bills. I'm just not earning enough.
17-year-old Lewis Hamilton is starting his own business publishing a magazine, but explained how he felt when looking for a job.
Hopeless. On several occasions I printed out, I think I had 5 or 6 drafts of my CV, and each time I printed 10, and I'd go around town and go to places like laundrettes, and they always told me I was too young to work there. I went to corner shops and they said I didn't have experience.
Some of his friends are in worse positions.
My mate, he had to drop out because his grades were too low. He'll come to the skate park every now and then. I ask him if he's been looking for jobs, and he goes, I don't bother because he ain't got the grades for it.
What are the risks for somebody who's NEET in the long term?
So if a young person is 12 months or more NEET, they are less likely in their future to ever catch up with their friends, their peers, who didn't have that same experience. So they'll always be left behind.
Reducing youth unemployment could have a serious impact on the economy, According to recent estimates by the Youth Employment Group, reducing NEET rates to the same levels as the Netherlands could generate up to $85 billion in GDP. Jen Copestake, CGTN, Northampton.
Let's talk to Eckhard Ernst, the chief macroeconomist at the International Labour Organization. Eckhard, welcome. There's nothing new about these numbers. They've been stubbornly high for about 20 years. Why is that?
Indeed, that's indeed a major problem for the UK, that these numbers are so high. And as you said, the decade-long average, both in terms of NEET and the youth unemployment rate, are higher. And what is very surprising about these numbers is that for the adult population in the UK, the numbers are in much better shape. We're talking about unemployment rates for adults of less than 4%. So one of the challenges that the UK actually faces is the education system. It was alluded already in your video that a lot of young people actually do not have alternative pathways to get the right education that they need. And these high-cost educational systems that the UK has for a large part of the youth population is simply neither affordable nor efficient. When you look at good-performing countries like Switzerland or even Germany, there is an alternative education system which allows young people to both study and work at the same time, so make a bit of money, but study in a system that's much more cost-effective than what you have in the UK. The other problem, obviously, and I think it's a bit the elephant in the room here, is Brexit, which has really affected the UK economy. Investment is low, and a lot of young people, especially in deprived areas outside, let's say, the major hubs, London and Manchester, are not really participating in whatever growth sectors the UK actually has.
Former Prime Minister Tony Blair tried to, I think, make 50% of UK children go to university. To go back to your previous comments about apprenticeships and going to technical colleges, which many other countries do, was that Blair policy wrong all those years ago to prioritise the university ambition?
Well, it's certainly a very challenging route for a lot of young people to take. I give you just one example. I was with my hairdresser yesterday in Switzerland, and he doesn't have a university education, but he makes a good chunk of money with his job. So countries who have these apprenticeship systems, they offer opportunities for young people to do something else and to maybe not have these long periods where they have to spend sitting behind a desk and study, which most young people actually not feeling particularly enticed to.
It's brutal medicine and a brutal thing to say, perhaps, but just watching the film we've just put out when the contributors were suggesting they didn't want to move to where the jobs were, they didn't have enough money to run a car. I mean, that's how a lot of us went into the workplace when we were young. Is this about expectation management too?
No, it's one of the challenges that we actually identify in our latest World Employment and Social Trends Outlook report, which is to say that with the new economy, especially with these major tech sectors emerging everywhere, is that you have some hubs like London, as I said, Manchester before, that really kind of concentrate all the wealth and economic activity, and it doesn't spread through the rest of the economy. In the past, in previous decades or so, you had the capacity of the economy to generate jobs, good jobs across the economy. We don't see that anymore, and this concentration is really a problem. Part of it is lack of infrastructure. You know as well how complicated it is to get around in the UK if you don't have a car, if you want to kind of rely on public infrastructure like trains or buses or so. So these issues are certainly not helping young people to move around. And you have to acknowledge the fact that not everybody has the capacity to own or to rent a car to go to work. So I think that having this public infrastructure is really essential for young people to access jobs.
Eckhard Ernst from the International Labour Organization. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. A real-life drama on stage in Paris as migrants occupy a theatre.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. Tensions are high among immigrant communities in the United States.
Many are fearful that raids could begin imminently after Donald Trump promised to deport anyone living in the country without permission. Our correspondent Dan Williams reports.
Little Village in southwest Chicago is a predominantly Mexican-American neighborhood, and over the last few days there is a growing sense of concern and anxiety here. It follows a host of sweeping executive orders signed by US President Donald Trump targeting immigrants. Trump has already declared a national emergency on the southern border as part of a crackdown on illegal migration. One of the administration's new directives will allow federal authorities permission to target what are considered sensitive areas, such as schools and churches, to arrest suspected undocumented immigrants. Those actions are already being felt in the community, according to the Centro de Trabajadores Unidos, a non-profit organization that advocates for the local immigrant population.
Obviously, there's fear. You know, people are afraid. They're afraid to go to work. They're afraid to go to the stores. They're afraid to even send their children to school. What's even more disappointing is we also have children who have this fear and have expressed that fear to our organization about what's going to happen if my mom or my father get deported, or what if the child is also deported themselves.
Chicago is a so-called sanctuary city, which means city authorities and the local police will not cooperate or share information with U.S. immigration and customs enforcement officials. But the Trump administration has vowed to make Chicago ground zero for federal raids. Other new Trump directives include expanding the pool of undocumented immigrants subject to fast-track deportation and an effort to end birthright citizenship, the guarantee that US-born children are citizens regardless of their parent status, as outlined in the US Constitution.
The key part is know your rights, to know that this organization's fighting out there for you, and to make sure that you're communicating to people and you understand that you have a network, that people aren't isolated. If you are isolated or siloed, you're easy to get.
Immigrant communities have been preparing for a more aggressive immigration policy ever since Donald Trump won the presidential election back in November. Communities like this one have shown incredible resilience over the years and now face new levels of uncertainty and fear. Dan Williams, CGTN, Chicago.
Over 300 people are continuing to occupy a theatre in Paris in a standoff that sparked great debate in the capital. The protesters are migrants who claim to be unaccompanied minors. They've been camping in the theatre since December. Our correspondent Giles Gibson reports.
La Gaîté Lyrique is an iconic venue here in central Paris, normally hosting concerts and other types of events, as well as serving as a community centre for this local area. But now it's becoming the centre of what's really becoming an increasingly tense standoff. Now, the Belleville Park Youth Collective, which is the organisation that's organised this occupation, is also holding regular protests about twice a week, demanding those activists that the local authorities provide some long-term accommodation for the young people who are currently sleeping inside that building behind me every night. All of this started back on the 10th of December when about 200 people moved into the building, occupied it, and started sleeping inside every night. And more than 6 weeks later, that number has risen to about 350 people. Now, the initial reaction from the venue was to negotiate with the collective rather than trying to have the people inside removed by the authorities by force. And as a result, they've had to cancel lots of events, they've had to move lots of events to different venues, and that lost revenue is meaning that they are coming under increasing financial pressure. What's also making this situation, this standoff, drag on is that the city government and the national government are just really at odds about how to actually respond to this situation. So the local government, the city government has said that they regret the occupation, but they're also calling on the national government to actually requisition empty buildings like hotels or empty public buildings so that the young people sleeping inside the theatre can have somewhere to stay in the medium or even in the long term. However, the Interior Ministry here in France, which since elections last year has really taken a much tougher line on immigration policy, has so far refused to wade into this dispute. Giles Gibson for CGTN, Paris.
Now, the Chinese musicians giving the Rolling Stones a run for their money. A group of elderly rock and rollers are in Beijing to play some special shows for Chinese New Year. Our correspondent Guo Tianqi went to meet them.
For some, retirement is the start of pursuing their dreams. That's the belief of this rock band, whose members average 75 in age. They've come to Beijing to record a New Year's program, giving us the opportunity to learn about their life wisdom. 81-year-old Dong Yunrong is the guitarist and team leader of the band.
We got up at around 4 o'clock this morning to prepare. Since we promised to come, we have to do a good job on the program. We've been performing for different organizations regularly, so we don't get nervous.
Most of the band members only started learning musical instruments after retirement, but because of their energy and unique style, they're becoming more and more popular. And rock and roll is now part of their daily lives. The keyboardist Tianrong Hao is the oldest member of the band. He's been playing the accordion for more than 60 years.
I'm 89 years old. I taught myself to play the accordion when I was young. I often say my secret of longevity is to have my own rhythm.
Tian's favorite pieces on the accordion are marches, which symbolize how life is constantly moving forward. In the new year, it was music that brought them together through the ups and downs of life, and it's taught them an invaluable lesson: to never give up on your dreams. Guo Tianqi, CGTN, Beijing.
And finally, the nominees for Hollywood's biggest accolade, the Oscars, have been revealed. This year's nomination ceremony began with a tribute to the firefighters battling the wildfires in Los Angeles.
Then it was down to business with Wicked, Emilia Perez and The Brutalist leading this year's nominations. All are included in the Best Picture category, which this year includes 10 movies. The award ceremony itself will be held on the 2nd of March.
And that is just about it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow. Same time, same place. From all of the team here in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.